Okay, so there are 5 things that you could state about a way that a composer can, manipulate your emotions. And part of it has to do with what you expect to happen. You expect to hear a 5/7 chord resolved to tonic, and to delay that by prolonging that harmony, and then delay it even further with silence is a really effective way of building that tension. And so Mozart said silence has the greatest effect in music. So it's really the background against which all the tones are set against. And so it does have a dramatic element. All right. So the last few minutes today, we'll talk about the next composer, Beethoven, who is a composer that is thoroughly based in the classical period, but we see with Beethoven a transition into the 19th century Romanticism. And so Beethoven was born in this little city of Bonn, Germany, and he was a talented teenager. His father was a very abusive alcoholic, and so he had a really tough upbringing. He had to, assume kind of the responsibility of being the provider of income, as a teenager, take care of his family. But he moved to Vienna in 1792, which was the year after Mozart died. And he had actually played for Mozart. And Mozart predicted a great future for him. He said, this guy's going to make a noise in the world one day. So when he moved to Vienna, he's made the statement that he was going there to receive the spirit of Mozart through the hands of Haydn. And so what he meant by that, he was going there to take lessons with Haydn. And he did take a couple of lessons with Haydn, but then, that kind of discontinued it. I think basically Haydn was just having him do counterpoint exercises. And it was, it wasn't exactly what he wanted to do. But at any rate, he made a huge name for himself in Vienna, initially as someone who was a great improviser. And so all accounts are that he had this tremendous, charisma and, personality that would really move the listeners. And so that was just one general thing about Beethoven, is that he had a really strong personality, very strong-willed, and he was able to make it as an independent musician 10 years after Mozart wasn't actually able to make it very well in Vienna. So Beethoven was able to, command large amounts of money for his compositions. So he was very successful at, selling his works. And he had lots of patrons, aristocratic patrons, who would commission works that Beethoven would write. So something happened in the end of the 18th century that was a tragic turn of events for Beethoven, and that is that he began to lose his hearing. So Beethoven's works are traditionally viewed in 3 stylistic periods. Note that this is an O, this is an A here, it's a Dutch name. So he died at the age of 57. And so these 3 phases, the first is more classical in orientation. So for sure, Beethoven's style is firmly rooted in the classical principles that we talked about with Mozart and Haydn. So that means that form was a really important element of his music. And maybe he was the greatest master of sonata allegro form of any composer. He certainly wrote some of the most important works in sonata allegro form. And his style developed a lot throughout the course of his career. So he really went through these different stages of evolution. So this first then was followed by a second period. And the year 1802 is an important year in that this was the year that he wrote the most famous letter in music history, which is called the Heiligenstadt Testament. So if you'll go to the web page, and if you'll look under the tab Translations, this is a document that will come up, Heiligenstadt Testament. Click on that and read this letter for Thursday. And in this letter, he talks about the situation that he finds himself in. So he's trying to come to terms with losing his hearing. And so his doctors advised, because they didn't know what to do, that maybe if he got away from the city noises and was more quiet, that would help his situation. And so he spent the summer of 1802 in what was then a little resort town that was on the outskirts. Now it's part of Vienna, but it was this little village of Heiligenstadt. And so he wrote this letter to his two brothers, and it's kind of like, the last, he was contemplating suicide. And he talks about the trauma that he was going through, but about the importance of music in his life. And so I want you to look to see what did Beethoven have to say about the importance of his music, and how did that relate? What also did he say about the idea of virtue and art? And so we'll talk about that on Thursday. We'll talk about the Heiligenstadt. And so that's kind of seen as a important point. Actually, he never mailed this letter. They found it in his possessions. Schindler was his assistant, and going through all his belongings after he passed away. And so, he preserved it, thank goodness. And Schindler went through and burned half of his conversation books. One of the things at the end of his life was that Beethoven, couldn't hear. And so, people would write out their questions to him, and, he would jot things down. And so he had all these conversation books, but his assistant felt like he had so many harsh things to say about, the aristocrats, that it would cast a bad light on him, so he burned those. But anyway, this middle period is a period that's much more emotional, and so it's much more intense. So this idea of the individualism of Beethoven's art really comes forward. And so this has been described as this urgent need to communicate, the sense of urgency about it. So this is middle period. And then late period is approximately 1815 to the end of his life. And so these were published as Opus 100 and higher. So Beethoven's works are known by their opus number. So that opus just means work. And so they were published in his lifetime. There are some works that were published after his death. And so you see this without opus that designates these posthumous works. With Haydn, the musicologist who cataloged all of Haydn's works, so you should just put this down for Haydn so that you know that musicologist's name, because Haydn's works are known by their Hoboken catalog number. So he was the musicologist who cataloged Mozart. That was Herschel, right? So Herschel is with Mozart, Hoboken. So with Beethoven, they're just known by opus numbers. And so we are going to stop there for right now. You'll pass those scores across.